The other day I got a question on Twitter on how we can build dynamic form fields the Hotwire way. That's a common question. Sean Doyle has a post on Thoughtbot's blog teaching how to implement this in Hotwire and Rails. That's such a great post that I wanted to cover how we could achieve the same thing in Laravel. The blog post shows how to approach a problem when building web UIs. In my opinion, this is one of the best tutorials about Turbo and Hotwire. Check it out, even if you don't use Turbo, because it shows us how we can leverage web technologies, considering trade-offs and progressively enhancing the user experience one step at a time without bending the knee to a client-side rendering JavaScript framework. Let's get started. I have a Laravel app over here. It's a fresh Laravel app using the Livewire stack of Jetstream. I've installed Turbo on it, and I added an addresses controller and the views to create addresses. You can imagine some e-commerce website where users can manage the addresses. In this type of forms, we usually have a country and state fields that are dependent on each other. As the user selects a country, the list of states reload with only the states of that specific country. We also have countries with no states, so ideally, the state field shouldn't even render in those cases. Let's start by rendering the countries options. If we go to the controller, our countries and states, in this case, are stored in the database. So we have a country model and we have a state model. Both of those are stored in the database. We didn't have to do that, but this is going to make things a little bit easier for us. We can fetch all countries using the address model, because I have created that previously. All countries, and if we save it and reload, we see the countries options over here. Now we have to list the states of a specific country. To do that, we are going to make another request to render the form. But in the second time, we are going to send the country as a query string. So we will receive the country over here in the request. And then we can load the states for that country. In the meantime, let me assign this to a variable. And then I'll add this as a fallback over here. So if nothing is set, then we select the first country as the country. I'll assign this to a variable called country. And over here, I'll load the states for this country, if there is any. So the address model also has a states for country, and I can pass the single country. And the method actually implements the condition for checking if it's null. So we don't have to do that over here. Now, if we reload, we can see that we show the states for Brazil. And this is my state. Now the goal is to, whenever I change the country, I get a new list of states, because if I submit with a different country for this state, for the selected state, what you see is we'll get a new list of states over here, and those are for the country that I selected. That's because the form re-rendered, and the second time it actually sent the selected country over here, so the states are reloaded for that specific country. And we have validation in place, so this state must belong to the country. Our goal now is to get the form to reload, passing the form fields to the backend. The easiest way to do that without JavaScript is by adding another button to this form that changes the form, such as the action and the method for this form. So let's add a button over here, and secondary button. I'm gonna call it select country, and I'm gonna give it a margin top of 2. This is going to be a submit button, but whenever this button is pressed, I actually want to change the action of the form. And to do that with forms, we can use the form method and form action attributes in the button itself. So for the method, I want to send a get, and for the action, I want to send this form to addresses create. And just like that, we see there is a new button. If we change the country and press select, we can see that all the fields were sent over to the backend again. So another get request was made, and the states were reloaded over here. So if we select Canada, we see the Canada states or provinces or whatever that's called. Belgium has the same thing, and Brazil over here. And if we have some place without states, the state field doesn't render. So that's what we want. All right, so this experience is not that great, but the thing is, we can actually disable JavaScript, and if we refresh, this will still work. So users with JavaScript disabled, they can still use this form, even though it's dynamic. However, the experience for users with JavaScript enabled is not that great, but we can improve that. Let's enable JavaScript, and let me clean this up. All right. Now, let's go back to the field over here, and let's wrap it in a no script tag. So this button only renders if the user has no JavaScript enabled. But now, since we are going to introduce JavaScript, we need a button that we can actually interact with. I'm gonna add another button, and this one will be hidden, and it will have the same attributes over here. So if we save and reload, the button is not visible because I have defined that all fields with the hidden prop are hidden. All right. Now we have to add a stimulus controller, which we can do by running artisan stimulus make element. And by the way, I'm using the stimulus Laravel package because I don't want to register the stimulus controllers, and the package does that for me. So just by creating a new controller, the package automatically manages the index file of my controller. So it just adds the new stimulus controller that we just created to the list. All right, so let's open that up. And in this one, also, it shows how we can actually use this. We're gonna use this in a second. We're going to need a stimulus target. And I'm gonna call this button. And I'm gonna create an action over here called click. And whenever this action is invoked, I want to get the button target and call the click method on it. This is the DOM element that we are going to register as the button target. So let's go ahead and register this controller to the element. Let's find a wrapper for the country, and this will do. Now we need to register the target over here. So it's data, the name of the controller, target, then button. And now we can register the action that we want to listen to. I'm gonna listen for the change event, and whenever that happens, whenever this element, whenever this field fires the change event, I want to call the element click. And just like that, if we refresh the page and we change the country, we see that the form was submitted, the new list of states is loaded. That's cool, but if you notice, we are losing scroll position over here. That's because the whole page is actually refreshing, and I want to avoid that. Also, I don't want the fields to be visible to the URL like that. And we can do that by wrapping the state field over here in a tuple frame. We are going to give it an ID of address form state field, something like that. That should do. And in the button, in the hidden button, we can tell tuple to target that frame instead of the whole page. So we can do that with the data tuple frame attribute, and then we give the frame ID to this attribute. And this, when the form is submitted with this trigger, which happens when we change the country, the form will point to this frame over here. So it will reload, find a matching tuple frame, which exists in this, since this renders the same page, and replace just this page. So let's save it and try it one more time. Before we do that, let's fix this. And to fix that, we can use the contents class. All right, so now if we change, you can see that the scroll position is persisted and the state is reloaded. And that's exactly what we want. However, sometimes we cannot use this approach because maybe there is a sensitive field in our form, like a password, and we don't want to send that over via the query string to the server, or sometimes there is a big field in our form and we also don't want to send that over the URL, because even though the URL spec doesn't mention a length limitation, we actually know that in practice it's around 2000 characters apparently. So if we have a really large field like a blog content section or something like that, then we basically can't use this approach. But this is not the case, so we are fine. However, I do want to show an alternative approach where we only send one field instead of sending all the form fields to the server. Alright, so users with JavaScript disabled, they will still send all the form fields to the backend when they press the button, but there's nothing we can actually do about it in this case. I think it's fine, but depending on your form, you may have to, find another way for users without JavaScript, or they can't use your app. We actually have a bug in our code. If we focus on one of the text inputs over here and we press enter, we can see that we made a GET request to the backend, not a POST. And that's because this select country button over here is the first button in the form, so it has priority. And there's actually no easy way to fix this. We could listen to the submit event over here and use JavaScript to properly submit the form, but there is a simple fix for this. We can actually have a hidden button as the first thing before the form opening tag, and just by adding that, we'll see that now we get the validation. So the form was submitted as a post. I like this solution because it doesn't use JavaScript. Feel free to choose whatever you want. So yeah, I wanted to show you how we have a tuple frame over here, and if we change, we are sending all the fields over to the tuple frame, which makes sense, but I want to avoid that. I only want to send the country because that's the only field that we depend on. And to do that, we will need a new controller. So let's create a new stimulus controller called search params. And in this one, I'm going to have a target called anchor. And we'll have a encode method over here that will receive an event. Let's register the controller and then we'll implement the action over here. We are going to add to the same element that we added the element controller. And we are also going to listen to the change event over here, but instead of calling the element controller, we are going to call the search params, and we are going to call the encode method. And we also want to register this as a search param target called anchor. Before we implement the action, one more thing. The order of the stimulus controller matters. Basically, stimulus will call the connect method one by one based on the order the identifier appears in the DOM list over here. It doesn't matter to us, but it matters to stimulus, and you may actually need this behavior eventually. What matters to us is the order of the event listeners over here. So stimulus will call for the same event, and it will call all the action handlers in the order they appear in the DOM. So we want to encode this param to the anchor over here before it's pressed, before the element controller clicks on it. So just know that the order matters when it comes to stimulus. And we are going to receive an event over here, and this event has a target, so we can deconstruct the target. And from this target, we want the target is the DOM element, so we want the name and the value of the field. We can iterate over the anchors. And I'm using anchor targets because we may want to have multiple targets over here eventually, but we don't in this case. And to set the URL, we could set the href and manage that, but anchor elements actually have a property called search, and we can give it a URL search params, which we can construct using the name and value that we got, and the DOM element will manage the URL and appending the fields for us, so we don't actually have to do any fancy string replacement. The HTML element can do that for us. Let's save it and take another look at our form. If we change it now, oh yeah, okay, I see it's still a button, so let's change it to a link. And since it's a link, I still want it to point to the frame. It's a link, so we don't have this, and we don't actually have this, and this should be the href. I'm sorry about that. Let's refresh. And of course, I forgot to close it. All right, so now if we refresh, we can see that only the countries pass to the backend and the states still reloads. So that's cool. That's what we want. Again, just to restate this, if we have JavaScript disabled, this form still works. There you have it. This is how we can implement dynamic form fields in Hotwire. One interesting thing about this approach is that only our view knows about tuple specific things. We don't have backend specific code for tuple. We don't have specific endpoints for our frontend. Everything is very testable in the backend. And we could have a single dusk test that ensures our frontend behaves correctly with JavaScript. Sean's approach suggests we start any feature by trying to implement it using full page transitions, server-rendered HTML, and form submissions. Once we have a solid foundation, we can incrementally enhance the page using JavaScript. I know some UIs don't fit this approach because it requires JavaScript, like maps or something like that. But this doesn't mean we should throw the towel and build the entire client side using JavaScript, in my opinion. This approach allows us to master the web technologies and ensures we at least try simple solutions first before we add more JavaScript. And one more thing, you may have noticed that I have a dedicated page over here for creating addresses. I also have one for listing addresses. And although that's fine, this doesn't actually fit the UX of Jetstream that well. Not that it doesn't have its own pages, but things over here in the profile page at least. Well, we have modals, we have everything happening over here. But as you can see, this doesn't mean we can't use tuple. Let me make some tricks over here. And I'm going to comment this out and I'm going to uncomment this. Also, I'm going to the addresses controller in the store method, and I'm going to assign the resulting address to a variable. And then I'm going to check if this request wants tuple stream, and I'm going to return two tuple streams, one for this address that was just created and one for the flash message. So if we press the new address button now, it opens as a modal and everything still works. If we hold Ctrl and open it in a new tab, we can see that this is actually the same form that we saw before. And if we refresh the page, you can see that for a brief second, there is nothing over here. So this entire section is actually coming from the addresses index page. So as you can see, we are not limited to building UIs the way tuple is built or something. We can actually have UIs that, look like the other UIs from Jetstream and just happen to be using tuple. And that's it actually. In the next video, I'm planning to go over this topic a little bit more, and we'll see how I actually implemented this model and everything else. So yeah, I'll see you when I see you. Bye.